Hello everyone, and welcome to PYLUSD for Truth. Today would reveal how Dr. Chernus, the district attorney, Leandra Blades, and Todd Frazier lie about DSA approval for the construction at USI. Also, if not for public intervention, they would have placed students and staff in potential danger. We've obtained emails from a public records request that clearly show what Chernus and the board majority were feeding the public was false. On April 11th, the district finalized their request for proposal, RFP, for USI. The plan for the new facility included amenities such as a golf simulator, hyperbaric room, training pool, and batting cages, among other extravagances. As we all know, the cost of this project is in the millions, including construction and equipment. In addition, you can see how the building would be divided up into many rooms, thus changing the layout of the building. On April 12th, Ron LaPlante, the principal structural engineer overseeing the DSA subregion that includes PYLUSD, contacted the district because they'd been alerted that there would be construction of the USI building on Casa Loma. It also states, quote, any alterations and construction for this new program require DSA approval for structural, fire, life safety, and access compliance. 2 days later, Chernus responded to LaPlante and claimed Patricia Hamzo, whom he described as a community activist, and wrote, quote, she's emailed God and country, was trying to sabotage district projects for political reasons. He also asked LaPlante not to respond to her. He falsely claimed that since the costs of the project were under $119,230 and there were no structural alterations, the project was exempt under DSA IRA-22. We won't trouble you to explain that because you'll see he was wrong on both accounts. He CC'd this email to Terry Tao, the facilities attorney hired by the district because, according to Chernus, quote, he's an expert in this area. Here's Chernus once again vouching for Tao in the board meeting in August after Carrie Buck questioned rehiring Tao to work for the district.
Is there any reason that we would consider using OHH instead, just because we had DSA issues where we were told we didn't have to call DSA and we did? And is this related to the Tao Rosini?
No. Terry Tao's one of the best land use attorneys out there, so we'd recommend using him.
Okay.
LaPlante responded to Chernus the following day, April 15th, and explained the new exemption threshold was under $128,000. And, to quote, keep in mind that this includes the cost of all construction, overhead, profit, equipment, etc. Did that say equipment? That's strange because of the special board meeting on May 14th, almost a month later. This is what Chernus said when questioned by Marilyn Anderson about DSA approval.
Dr. Chernus, you said that we had a DSA approval and you received a letter from that. And I asked at that meeting if you could give me that documentation.
What I said was we received a letter from DSA saying, and to Carrie Buck's point, there are requirements for construction. There's no DSA requirements for putting equipment in. Just like there's not DSA requirements if you put $1.5 million in computers or books in a classroom. This is equipment. There's no structural alterations to the facility.
Okay. I asked to get that letter and I didn't receive it. So
We were emailed that.
Yeah, I got it. All of us, the whole board.
Yeah.
We all got it.
from DSA,
I will go back and check, I believe.
So, the DSA said to include equipment, but Chernus said the exact opposite, knowing equipment was part of the cost. Equipment and construction, which would easily exceed the $128,000 threshold because it was literally spelled out to him in writing from DSA. Later that day, Tao emailed LaPlante and described the project as, quote, mostly putting down exercise mats and bringing in some exercise equipment. He also wrote, quote, we know there are no structural alterations or structural events, and he called LaPlante later. Did we mention that according to his bio on his firm's website, Mr. Tao is not only an attorney, but also a licensed architect? So we have an expert in both law and architecture making false claims about this project? Why didn't he know the equipment was part of the $128,000 threshold? Wasn't he familiar with the RFP and the costs? Didn't he look at the architectural drawings? I think we're starting to see the real reason Chernus wanted Tao on board. Also, was the offer of a phone call a means to circumvent public records requests? Just a thought. The next day, Tout sent another email to LaPlante regarding the, quote, change in classroom use from special education classroom use to athletic education, as well as, quote, any facility-related changes. LaPlante responded later that evening, thanking Tao. Before we go on, we'd like to revisit the May 14th special board meeting when Chernus lied about no DSA requirements for equipment. Then, Blades and Frazier chimed in that they were emailed a letter supporting Chernus's lie.
There's no DSA requirements for putting equipment in. Just like there's not DSA requirements if you put $1.5 million in computers or books in a classroom. This is equipment. There's no structural alterations to the facility.
Okay, I asked to get that letter and I didn't receive it. So,
We were emailed that.
Yeah, I got it, all of us, the whole board.
Yeah.
We all got it.
from DSA,
I will go back and check. I believe so.
Their response poses two problems. First, if they were true, then it would be a Brown Act violation because the letter wasn't shared with the entire board. The second, and far more likely explanation, is that they were lying. And here's why. On May 17th, just 3 days after the same meeting, LaPlante emailed Cal and Ralph Figueroa, Director of Maintenance and Facilities for the district. And he copied Chernus. In the email, LaPlante informed them that despite being told there would be little to no construction, that, quote, wall finishes have been removed down to the studs, doors removed, and a few permanent partitions have been removed. He then listed 10 points outlining why construction at Casa Loma required DSA approval. So, Leandra and Tom couldn't have received such a letter because it didn't exist. What did was this email we're sharing with you now. First, he noted the change in use and occupancy required safety code analysis. He mentioned that due to the size of the building, it may require fire sprinklers. This point is interesting because Todd Frazier and Leandra Blades tried to explain that this was the reason for the project being stopped in the September board meeting, 5 months after Chernus received this email.
And they thought the Casa Loma address had fire sprinklers in it already.
DSA did.
DSA
because of the
DSA
prior.
thought because of the prior regulations in 2013, they said you cannot use this building unless there's fire sprinklers installed. So they were already under the assumption at first with that project that there were fire sprinklers already put in. That's why we didn't think we needed the approval. It wasn't until they actually started to research more into the project because of all the phone calls, they realized that in 2013, the fire sprinklers were never put in.
So, they were either lying about the reasons or Chernus and his handpicked attorney were lying to the entire board. We'll leave it up to you to decide. Leandra's lying here by trying to implicate previous boards and claiming DSA just assumed that fire sprinklers had been installed. That's a lie. DSA would never make such an assumption and would inspect the building. You would think someone married to a firefighter and sitting 2 seats away from another one could spend a few minutes to figure this out. Point 1 also mentions that the changes might require fire alarm changes to include strobes and horns or speakers, smoke or heat detectors in all rooms. By attempting to bypass DSA requirements, Chernus was putting students and staff at risk in the event of a fire. Point 2 from LaPlante noted the change of occupancy put the new facility in a higher risk category, which would trigger structural rehabilitation to make the building safer. Again, Chernus seemed all too willing to forgo safety measures to meet an arbitrary deadline that he missed anyway. Point 3. In the May special board reading, Marilyn Anderson questioned how construction in the form of turf being laid down could take place without DSA approval. Here's what Chernus had to say about that.
It's like when you do an RFP, you purchase books or you purchase technology. When the DSA deals with alterations to buildings, we are not altering the building.
but we are putting in turf, and turf is,
That's not part of the building inside of that. It's attached to the
but
building.
it is part of a DSA.
You're incorrect.
And here's what DSA had to say about that. Quote, all turf projects require DSA approval per DSA IR A-22 Appendix Item 9T. This is pretty ironic, since this is the same document Chernus cited as to why the entire project was exempt from DSA approval. So did Chernus not conduct his due diligence, or did he lie? Feel free to form your own conclusions. In points 4 and 5, you can see battered cages required DSA approval. And, apparently, someone tried to circumvent DSA approval by dividing costs, which is not allowed. LaPlante notes that the turf project alone will exceed this amount. Point 6 emphasizes the $128,000 exemption doesn't waive building code provisions or the responsibility to hire people to ensure compliance with building codes. We like to think this also pertains to making sure everything is safe for students, which again, Chernus and the majority were willing to sacrifice. Point 7 illustrates that there were now walls and openings that do not appear to exist in the building on approved DSA plans. One might call them alterations, which also require approval. Here's an attached illustration highlighting these changes. Recall, Chernus wrote on April 14th that, quote, there is no structural alterations, followed by Cal repeating this falsehood the following day. Both of these aren't in writing. At the May 7th board meeting, Chernus went even further, stating there's no structural alterations to the building, DSA didn't need approval, and that the district had authorization.
I had a question related to the USI, and does the USI require any testing and inspection services for installation of any of the equipment and the remodel of the PDA?
I mean, we're talking about testing from.
Does the
From who?
DSA have any?
DSA, no. So
They don't
DSA
have to
because
look at any of the items related to.
No,
no,
Sports
we've
Institute.
checked with.
there's no structural alterations to the building. Therefore, DSA does not need approval, and we have authorization and clarification from DSA that we do not.
Can you
There-
provide the clarification and approval to us, please?
We'll be sure to get that to the board.
Clearly, he knew this wasn't the truth, but chose to lie anyway because they were getting ready to approve the RFP the following week. Why let rules and safety regulations stop down? Point 8 focuses on exit plans in case of emergencies and refers to the speed and agility area needing panic hardware, requiring DSA approval. Here's the accompanying markup from the plan, so add that to the list of safety measures that Chernus actively sought to ignore. Point 9 in the email acknowledged that when this email was written, construction had already begun, which we now know it shouldn't have, and points out even partial ventilation in an existing building requires DSA approval. And finally, point 10 states that Education Code requires written approval of plans by the DSA for, quote, letting any contract for construction. So, all those contractors hired for this job before getting approval shouldn't have been. To recap, Chernus lied when he claimed the district didn't need but also had DSA approval in board meetings. He also lied when he wrote to the DSA claiming the project was exempt and there were no structural alterations, a lie repeated the following day by Tal, a lawyer and architect who worked with Chernus when he was in Palos Verdes. They lied about the cost not exceeding $119,000, not even knowing that the threshold was $128,000, which the cost of the project would still easily exceed. For reference, installation of turf and flooring alone cost over $200,000. Most importantly, Chernus and the majority placed students and staff in danger by attempting to forge ahead without DSA approval and ignoring required safety measures. Then you'd have Fraser and Blades claiming the only reason the construction was stopped was because of fire sprinklers that DSA assumed were there, which is not the case. That needs to add fire sprinklers and other fire safety measures as well. Chernus's, Blades, and Fraser's negligence also ignored the fact that changes in the use of the building required structural rehabilitation to ensure safety for the students and the staff there. At multiple points, they willfully sacrificed safety for expedience. At every point, Chernus and the majority had the chance to do what was right, but each time they made the wrong choice. They chose secrecy over transparency. They chose lies over truth. They chose themselves over safety. They chose corruption over children.